All right, I
You
started.
want me to go ahead, or do you have something?
You can go ahead.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and I can see that everybody that's on probably knows more than me about this topic. So we'll just keep it really basic, and you can add in as you have clarity, or if you just have any experience you want to share. But what I'd like to talk about is are some winter feeding considerations. And when I first came up with the topic, it seemed kind of ridiculous, but now winter is upon us. So turned out to be pretty timely after all. But I'd like to start, if my computer will work. I'd like to start just by reviewing some energy requirements of beef cattle. And I know there might be some sheep. I don't know if there's any sheep owners in the Zoom or not, but I'm mainly going to stick with beef. I wanted to start with some energy requirements of beef cattle. And as you probably know, with forage based livestock, we like to talk about energy needs in terms of total digestible nutrients, or TDN. That's as opposed to calories. We can talk about it in calories, but TDN just works really easily. It's very simple. And I got some numbers out of the National Research Council's standards for beef nutrition. And I have 4 different classes of cattle here. We have a 6-weight steer gaining 1.5 pounds a day. We have a heifer in late gestation, a 1,300-pound cow in peak lactation, and a 1,300-pound cow in late gestation. And the bar graphs that you see here, that's under no stress. So you're not taking into account weather or anything like that. And you can see the steer, the heifer, the cow at peak lactation have some pretty high, relatively high nutrient energy requirements in the low 60s to mid 60s in TDN. That dry cow or late gestation cow, of course, has a little bit lower requirements, down in the low 50s or mid 50s for TDN. Now, how do some of our common forages that we feed in the wintertime stack up to these nutrient requirements? I hope you can see a couple of red lines on that chart. The bottom red line would be where our average first grass hay tends to fall out in terms of energy content. It's usually going to be in the low 50s or the mid 50s in TDN. You know, sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower, depending on whether you've got second growth coming into that, you know, when you cut it, so forth. But generally, you can expect it to be in the low 50s. Our second cut grass hay, some of our mixed legume grass first cutting hay, and our stockpiled fescue pasture this time of year, so kind of getting into February, March time period, they all tend to be around the mid 60s in TDN. And again, there's a range, but that's kind of the average where I'd say it falls. And you can see that first cutting grass hay really only adequately meets the needs of that late gestation cow. Our second cutting grass hay or our stockpiled fescue pasture, that's going to meet the needs for the most part of any of those other classes of livestock that we've got up there. Now that was nutrient requirements under no stress at all. Before we move on to talking about what those requirements would look like under weather conditions like we're having right now, I'll show you just an illustration from my in-laws farm. They raise red Angus, And they have two classes of cattle on their farm. One's a group of heifers, replacement heifers, and another's the cow group. And they purchased First Cutting hay. They quit cutting their own hay years ago at my urging, and now they just purchased their hay. His First Cutting hay, as you can see, is, and we tested it this year, it came in at about 54% TDN, and it's falls short of what both those groups of animals need. So we talked about some of the options for supplementing energy to get them to where they need to be. And what we ended up doing was supplementing that First Cutting grass hay with about a little over 3 pounds of a commodity pellet per head per day. And by the numbers, that works out to pretty much match their energy requirements. Now, some year, and this is the case most years, they're always buying that First Cutting hay, and it always tends to fall out at about the same quality. There are some years where they just don't get around to supplementing them for whatever reason. Lots of other stuff going on. And when they've done that, you can see the cows kind of go backwards. And I ran the numbers on this, and according to the book values, feeding them continuously at this kind of deficiency would take about 3 months to lose one body condition score. Now, typically they're on good pasture in the fall, and so they're fat going into winter, and it doesn't really cause too much harm to their breeding, but it could if you're in the right situation. So we definitely don't want them losing body condition leading up to breeding. I think everybody knows that. Now, we've got some pretty wintry weather right now. And I went back into the nutrient requirements of beef cattle that I referred to earlier from the National Research Council and looked up kind of what the impact of cold and wind and mud was on the energy requirements of beef cows. And here's what I found. So, and these are, again, kind of average values, but an average temperature of 32 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a little bit below the animals. I forget what the term would be. John could probably tell us. Not their set point, but basically where they're not under any kind of cold stress. That average temperature of 32 increases a cow's energy needs by 5%. When the temperature drops down to 14 degrees, and leave it to academic publication to make it 14 and not 15 degrees. But when it drops down to 14 degrees, a cow's energy needs increase by 16%. Wind. Once air temperatures are below freezing, a 10-mile-an-hour wind increases the energy demands of cattle by about 20%. That's on top of any kind of increase of energy demands from additional cold, so it's an additive thing. 10 miles per hour is not, it's windy, but it's not that hard to hit a 10-mile-an-hour wind. So past couple of days here at my house have been pretty constant windy conditions like that. Now we don't have mud on the ground right now because we've got a nice layer of snow over it, but we know that is to come. And what I found here in the research was that cattle confined on ground with 4 inches of mud will typically reduce their daily intake by about 15%. So that's a reduction in intake. I think it's probably because of the logistics of trying to move through the mud and troubles there. They didn't really specify, but that's just something to consider. And you all know how important it is to keep animals as clean as possible through your feeding methods. And cattle that are consistently wet or mud covered, and they define this as being well, consistently, but also above the upper third of their body. Those cattle have a 15 to 20% higher energy demand than when they are clean and dry. And I know, it's, you tell me how common that is to have mud covered cattle on the upper 2/3 of their body. It's not super common, but I've definitely seen it. So what I wanted to do then is just to show you what the past couple of days would have done to the energy requirements of those classes of cattle we just looked at a little bit ago. So we still have the 6-weight steer, which is your first column. We have the heifer, it's the second column, and then the 1,300-pound cow at peak lactation and the 1,300-pound cow in late gestation. Our blue bars are the ones that we looked at when they were under no stress. That's their TDN energy requirement under no stress. The green bar is going to be with the kind of cold and wind that we've had the past couple of days, which have essentially increased their energy requirement by about 20% or something around there, 25% even. Those same forage sources that we looked at before, here's how they stack up now. The first cutting grass hay is not really meeting the needs of any of those classes of cattle under these kinds of conditions. The first cutting grass hay with the commodity pellet supplement, that's still falling short for 3 out of those 4 categories. And my point in all this is we don't have that often sustained winter conditions like they do out in the Midwest or in the West. So I'm not trying to say that we have a situation in the wintertime where it's just cattle are unstoppably going backwards on their body condition. But I guess the point is to say we're going to have conditions throughout the winter that are going to cause them to lose body condition. I was talking to John earlier today, and I think he made the comment, you expect that, right? So the point is maybe that yes, we should supplement to try and meet their energy requirements, but we don't want to be trying to play catch up. And I got to give John the credit here. Had a discussion with him today and just batted some ideas around. He did confirm you're a lot better off to try and foresee your needs a few months out and kind of plan to get them the nutrition they need before they need it. You need to be a few months out and make sure that they're on that increasing plan of nutrition and they're in the best, the body condition score that they need to be going into calving and into breeding. So here's some recommendations that John gave. He said about 3 to 4 months before feeding, identify hay quality. And if not through hay testing, at least based on the cutting that you took. Was it first cutting, second cutting? You know that. Your first cutting is going to be a little poorer quality. It's stemmier. Your second cutting is going to be more vegetative and leafy and better quality. Which fields have perhaps a legume content in them, whether it's an alfalfa or red clover or something like that. So at least try and record, what you have where and allocate the better hay to the animals that need it the most. 3 months before calving, John recommended to identify those thin cows and supplement them energy to get them to where you want them to be, which is about a body condition score of 5 at calving. He also said to pull in your heifers into a separate group and supplement them energy, with our goal being a body condition score of 6 and a weight of 85% of their mature weight at calving. Did I catch that all right, John? Are you listening or are you eating supper?
No, man, I think that's kind of what I would recommend. A good time to body condition score. If you're preg checking later in the game, um, near or at weaning, and I know some producers might do that. Um, that's a good time to body condition score the cows. Um, if you preg check earlier, but you do wean later, you could still use weaning as that time frame, which might get you close to 3 months before calving, and should allow you to identify any issues early on. Um, Certainly, some cows can come up lame at any point, and they would be some supplement considerations, and maybe they could be pulled in with the heifers to be given some extra tender loving care. But yeah, I would agree. At least having those cows at BCS 5 um, and heifers at BCS 6 to minimize rebreeding impacts after calving.
Thanks. I just have a couple more slides here and then I'll kind of open it up for questions. You notice I haven't said anything yet at all about protein. And the reason is, again, you probably all know this, we tend to be energy limited in the East here and not protein limited with regards to our hay and pasture. There are a lot of companies and co-ops and so forth that will push protein blocks, the protein lick tubs, it'll push liquid molasses. And, from my point of view, we really don't need those very often. I've only seen a handful of hay samples in my entire career that have been low enough in protein to justify protein supplementation. And our pasture, the protein holds up pretty well also. So I know with liquid molasses, that does have a high energy content, but when you look at how much they can actually consume in a day's time, it's not really supplying that much. It's not an energy supplement. Good energy supplements, I have corn listed here. A lot of people feed cracked corn or something like that. With animals that are ruminants that are on pasture or hay, mainly, the corn can suppress the ruminant or the digestion of the forages. So we tend to, I guess, shy away from that if you're looking at feeding too much of it. Corn gluten pellets, wheat midds, commodity pellets are some byproduct feeds that are very popular here in the Valley, and they're cost competitive with corn. And they also are a fiber-based source of energy, so they don't depress fermentation as much. So I just don't really care for the protein sources. Hay testing, that last couple slides ago mentioned testing your hay a few months out to see what you've got. And that's certainly an option. Extension can help you with that. And what that's going to show you is going to show you crude protein which is circled up here with this red circle. And then we've got that TDN, the energy value that we've been talking about this evening. That's down there in the lower right-hand part of the page. So you can do that. That's the only way to truly know what hay quality you have. But as I pointed out earlier, you really can get an idea of what you're working with hay quality just by knowing whether it was first cutting, second cutting, whether it's got legumes in, and actually maybe write that down or paint on a hay bale or something like that at the end of a row so that you don't forget, because we tend to forget how much legume was in a cutting by the time winter rolls around. So practical ways to improve hay quality, soil fertility, particularly nitrogen, but also if your phosphorus and potassium are limited, the quality of the hay is not going to be as good. The yield's not going to be as good either. But we definitely see a bump in most cases in energy by adding nitrogen fertilizer, whether that's manure or commercial fertilizer or legumes. The other point I have here is to pay extra for better hay. I gave you the illustration of my in-laws that purchased that first cutting hay. This year he got it for about, I think, $35 a bale for a 4x5 round bale. And the energy content was pretty poor. It was in the low 50s, as we'd expect. Well, he had the opportunity to buy some other first cutting hay that we knew was better. We knew it had some red clover in it. And we ended up testing it, and it indeed was significantly better and could have resolved his need to supplement. And it was only about $5 a bale more. So he would have been much better buying that little bit of better hay versus paying 45 cents per head per day for that commodity pellet. And then my last recommendation would be to frost seed red clover. And we could use other legumes in our hay, alfalfa, for example, but red clover is very easy to just broadcast and get it established very quickly. And it really has a presence in your within the first year or so. So those are just some practical recommendations, and I'll stop sharing and just kind of open it up for questions or comments.
Matt, John here. What was your in-laws commodity pellet? Do you remember some of the ingredients and how did they feed it?
I think it was a three-way mix of soy hulls, wheat mid, and gluten, but it was all, of course, ground up and pelletized together. And they fed it. They had some black, the black troughs with the red runners on them. I think they were feeding out of them one time.
Okay.
Sometimes I think they put it on the ground. It's probably not the best option.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. If nobody else has any questions, we'll